Hello, this is Olivia. Nathan and I have been living together for 2 years. The first year felt like a blur, so much newness, getting used to each other's habits, the ebb and flow of shared space. But after 2 years, I thought we had it figured out. We'd built something, and I felt like it was real. Comfortable. Routine, in the best way possible. We spent most weekends with Rachel and David, Nathan's sister and her husband. They were always around, dinners, barbecues, game nights that ran too late into the night. It was the kind of thing people envied, I suppose. The four of us together felt natural. They were family, but they weren't my family. Not yet. At first, I thought I was okay with that. It didn't bother me that much. Nathan and we had our thing. But still, I could never completely shake the feeling of being on the outside looking in, especially when it came to Rachel. She was his sister. She could say things to him I could never get away with. I always respected that, her place in his life, her closeness to him, but I also saw the way Nathan always deferred to her. It wasn't anything overt, but I noticed it. He was protective of her, in ways that sometimes felt like it crossed boundaries. I liked Rachel, but I didn't always trust her. Maybe that's why I started to watch things more closely. The way Nathan sometimes let things slide, avoided confrontation when it was necessary. And I didn't mean just with Rachel. It was bigger than that. I'd see him turn a blind eye to things, little lies here, subtle betrayals there, and it wasn't always clear whether it was because he didn't want to rock the boat or if he genuinely didn't care. Nathan was the kind of guy who could smile through anything. He had this way of handling situations with charm, even when there was a mess to clean up. And maybe that was it, that balance between charm and avoidance. The way he walked that line made me uneasy sometimes. We never had big fights, but I'd catch moments when something didn't sit right, when his version of honesty seemed more flexible than mine. I didn't say anything, though. I didn't press him on it. I didn't even know if it was something to worry about, so I let it go. But in the back of my mind, I knew there was something else there. It wasn't even about trusting Nathan, I wanted to. I really did. But the longer we were together, the more I saw that his ideas of loyalty and honesty didn't always match up with mine. And that, I realized, was the thing I couldn't ignore. Maybe I was too rigid. Maybe my need for things to be clear-cut, black and white, wasn't the best way to live. But with Nathan, it felt like we were constantly dancing around something unspoken, some difference in how we defined what was right. It wasn't a huge issue, not yet. Not a deal-breaker. But it was there, lurking in the background, and I couldn't stop wondering whether I was the one making it bigger than it was. But for now, we moved forward. We smiled. We planned our next weekend with Rachel and David. All the while, I couldn't shake that quiet discomfort, the nagging sense that something, somewhere, wasn't adding up. The discovery didn't happen the way I thought it would. I didn't expect to find out like this, not like a piece of gossip floating through the air, slipping past my defenses. It was a Thursday, a quiet evening when Nathan and I had planned to just relax, no big plans, no family obligations. I'd gotten home a little late from work, tired and in need of a glass of wine. Nathan was already in the kitchen, cooking something that smelled better than it had any right to. He'd been talking about this new recipe for a while, so I didn't think anything of it when I grabbed my phone to check a few things. Just a quick scroll before we ate. And that's when I saw it. The message. It wasn't just a casual text, it was an email, the kind you don't expect to find in your partner's inbox. The kind that's written like a confession but wrapped in the layers of secret language that makes it all the more damning. There it was, clear as day. A message from Rachel, asking Nathan to cover for her. To keep it quiet. A coded request, as if it was perfectly normal. At first, I thought I'd misread it. I stared at the screen, reading it again, trying to force myself to understand it differently. But no. The truth hit me like a punch in the gut. Rachel was cheating. And Nathan had known. The air in the room shifted. The sounds of the kitchen, the sizzle of onions in the pan, the hum of the refrigerator, seemed too loud now, somehow. I felt frozen, unable to move. I wanted to scream, but my throat tightened, choking the words before they could escape. My mind couldn't process it. Rachel. His sister. The woman I'd spent so many hours with, laughing at her jokes and sharing stories, all of it a lie. I wasn't even sure what to do. Should I confront Nathan right away? Should I wait for him to come to me? It felt like my chest was about to cave in, but I didn't want to explode, not without knowing the full story. So I kept quiet, let him finish dinner. He didn't notice how stiff I'd become, or how my hands were trembling slightly as I set the table. He was so calm, so oblivious, and I hated that. Hated him, for the first time in a long while. It wasn't until we were sitting down to eat, halfway through our meal, that I broke. The question had been sitting in my chest for what felt like hours, waiting for the right moment to come out, but there was no right moment. There was only this, and I needed answers now. Did you know? My voice was steady, almost too steady, like I'd practiced saying the words, like I could have said them 1,000 times before. Nathan paused, his fork hovering just above his plate, and for a split second, I could see the flicker of something. Guilt? Fear? I couldn't tell. He didn't meet my eyes. About Rachel? He asked, his tone too casual. About Rachel cheating, I corrected, leaning forward slightly. He hesitated. His silence stretched between us, and in that moment, it felt like the world was shrinking, like the walls of our small apartment were closing in. I didn't know it was serious, he finally said, and the words made my blood run cold. I didn't think it was something you needed to worry about. I stared at him, searching for some hint that he was joking, that this was all just some misunderstanding. But no. This was real. And I could already tell, he wasn't going to apologize. He wasn't going to admit that he'd failed, that he'd let his sister's betrayal spill into our lives like this. Instead, he just sat there, waiting for me to understand. Don't you think I needed to know? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Don't you think it matters? I'm protecting her, he said, like that explained everything. She's my sister, Olivia. Family comes first. It wasn't the first time I'd heard him say something like that. His loyalty to his family was unshakable, and I respected that, at least, I had. But this was different. I wanted him to stand by me, too. I wanted him to put us first. So you'd cover for her? The words came out before I could stop them. Nathan's eyes shifted away, guilt flashing in them for just a moment, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to make me forget the truth. I'm not saying it's right, he said, his voice low. I'm just saying, sometimes you protect the people you love, even if it's hard to do. Even if it's wrong, I added, the final piece falling into place. You'll protect her, even if it means enabling her to hurt other people. Like me. He was quiet for a moment, and I could feel the tension thickening between us. This was the moment I'd been afraid of, the moment where we would finally have to face the truth about how different we were. How different we always had been. And when he spoke again, his voice was soft, but the words were final. I don't see it that way. I don't think you get it, Olivia. She's family. I get it, I said, standing up. But this isn't just about family, Nathan. This is about trust. And I'm not sure I can trust you anymore. I left the table, the room feeling smaller than it had ever been, and as I walked away, I realized I didn't know if we'd ever fix this. I didn't know if we could ever go back to the way things were. The silence was unbearable. The kind of silence that settles in when everything has already been said, but no one knows how to make it stop. Nathan didn't say much after the confrontation. I couldn't even bring myself to look at him. The air in the apartment felt different, too heavy, too thick. We didn't talk about it again that night, and I didn't know what to do with the anger twisting in my chest. I couldn't just pretend everything was fine. The days dragged on like that. I found myself avoiding him more and more. Every time he looked at me, it was like I was seeing him for the first time, seeing the distance between us that I hadn't noticed before. Maybe it was always there, maybe I'd been blind to it. But this wasn't just about Rachel. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about something deeper. Nathan didn't see loyalty and trust the same way I did. For him, family came first, and everything else was secondary. He would protect Rachel, even if it meant covering up lies, even if it meant sacrificing his own integrity. He thought that was okay. He thought I would understand. I couldn't. I couldn't get past it. I spent hours thinking about it, about us, and I couldn't reconcile the way he saw the world with the way I did. For me, trust was everything. I couldn't forgive betrayal, not like that. I couldn't sit back and let him enable something that went against everything I believed in. One night, after a particularly cold dinner, I had enough. He didn't understand, and I wasn't sure he ever would. I couldn't fix it. I couldn't keep pretending that this was something worth saving. "We're not the same," I finally said, my voice quiet but clear. Nathan didn't respond at first. His eyes flickered, like he was processing my words, but then he just nodded. I know. I couldn't tell if he was acknowledging the truth or just giving up. I wasn't looking for apologies anymore. I was looking for something else, something real. But all I could hear was his version of what was right, and I couldn't live with it. "I don't think I can do this anymore," I said, barely above a whisper. Nathan's face went stiff. I didn't need him to say anything. His silence told me everything I needed to know. We were over, even if he couldn't say it yet. The weight in my chest was still there, but it was lighter. Maybe because I finally made a choice. I wasn't going to stand by someone who didn't see the world the way I did. I wasn't going to pretend anymore. I grabbed my things and called my brother. I didn't explain, I didn't have to. He didn't ask. He just said he'd be there. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the only thing left to do. I wasn't sure what would come next, but I wasn't staying here. Not anymore. The days after I left Nathan felt like an endless blur. The quiet of my brother's apartment was both a relief and a reminder that I was now, in a way, untethered. The sound of his keys in the door, the hum of the refrigerator, it all felt oddly peaceful, like I was finally exhaling after holding my breath for years. Nathan called a few times, but I didn't pick up. I couldn't. I didn't want to hear his voice. Not yet. Not when everything still felt raw. He texted, two little things, like "Are you okay?" or "We need to talk." But each time I read them, the knot in my stomach only tightened. There was nothing to say. Not right now. I couldn't even imagine having a conversation with him where I wouldn't feel like I was holding everything in. He showed up at my brother's place a week later, unannounced. It wasn't a surprise. He knew where I was. I'd told him once, months ago, when we'd talked about our parents' houses in the event of an emergency. It was still his first instinct to come after me when things fell apart, but I wasn't sure I was ready for whatever he was going to say. I opened the door, and there he was. His eyes were dark, shoulders slumped. Like he was already beaten before the conversation even started. His voice was low and he spoke, as if trying to keep the weight of it from crushing him. I didn't want it to end like this. His words hit me harder than I expected, more than I wanted. The truth was, I didn't want it to end like this either. But there was no fixing it. Not when the cracks were so deep. I didn't either, I said. I stepped back to let him in, not because I wanted to, but because there was no point in keeping him outside. We both knew why he was here. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but it wasn't this quiet, pleading version of Nathan. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even defensive. He was just tired. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think it would come to this." I stared at him for a long moment. "You didn't think?" I repeated, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "You didn't think about how I'd feel? How this would affect us?" His eyes dropped to the floor. "I was protecting Rachel. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought you'd understand." "I don't," I replied sharply. "I don't understand how you could sit there and tell me that you'd protect her over me. Over us." His face tightened, and for a moment I thought he might get defensive again, but instead, he just nodded. I know I messed up." He kept repeating it, like if he said it enough, it would make things better. But it didn't. The words felt hollow, like he was apologizing because he thought he had to, not because he truly understood the damage. "I don't think you do," I said quietly. "Because if you did, you wouldn't have done it in the first place." He let out a long breath, his hand raking through his hair. I watched him, my chest tight. I didn't want to hate him. I didn't. But the more I heard him apologize without changing his perspective, the more I realized we were speaking different languages. The truth wasn't just about what he'd done, it was about how he couldn't see what was wrong with it. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice hoarse. "Maybe we can figure this out. I've been talking to Rachel, and I—" "No," I interrupted him, the word sharp. "This isn't about her anymore. This is about you and me. You've made your choice. You've chosen her over me, and I can't live with that." He didn't argue. He didn't say anything for a long while. I could see the regret in his eyes, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to undo everything that had happened. I could feel the weight of it, the weight of everything unsaid, and I knew I was done. "I don't think I can do this anymore, Nathan," I said, the finality of my words ringing in the quiet room. He nodded slowly, almost as if he'd expected it. "I get it." I watched him walk out, his shoulders heavy with the weight of what he couldn't undo. The door closed softly behind him, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't waiting for something to break. It already had. I sank onto the couch, not sure if I was relieved or just empty. I didn't feel strong. I didn't feel anything but tired. But I knew I had made the right choice. And that was enough, for now. It's strange how quickly life starts moving again after something like this. You don't realize how much of yourself you've been holding back until it's all finally over. After Nathan left, I didn't feel free. I felt empty. It wasn't about the breakup, it was the weight of everything I hadn't wanted to see, everything I'd been ignoring for too long. It wasn't just him, it was me, too. I'd built my world around someone who didn't share the same values, and now I was left trying to rebuild a life that didn't feel so shaky anymore. My brother, Steve, was a constant presence. He kept me grounded in a way that I didn't know I needed. He didn't ask a lot of questions, didn't push me to talk about the details. He just showed up. Sometimes, we'd sit in silence. Other times, we'd watch movies, and I'd forget about the knot in my stomach, even if it was just for a couple of hours. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness, though. It wasn't the silence. It was the realization that Nathan and I had been living in two completely different worlds. I could no longer pretend that we were on the same page, that we shared the same definition of loyalty or trust. I thought we had the same foundation, but what we had was a house built on sand. In the weeks that followed, Nathan reached out less and less. Part of me expected him to keep fighting for us, but I don't know what I wanted from that. I had already made my decision. I couldn't go back, not when his family, his sense of loyalty, was always going to come before me. I wasn't the kind of person who could look the other way. I couldn't live with someone who made excuses for betrayal. it wasn't just the affair. It was the way he treated me, like I was the one being unreasonable for wanting honesty. I couldn't respect that. Not for the long haul. Trust wasn't just a word for me, it was everything. When it was broken, it was gone. And once it was gone, it wasn't something I could ever get back. I spent a lot of time thinking about what this all meant. Was this really the end? Could I forgive him? Could I have stayed if I wanted to? Maybe. But I knew I wouldn't. Not when I saw how differently we viewed the world. Not when I understood, finally, that some things, some values, were more important than love. One afternoon, after a long walk to clear my head, I called him. He answered quickly, like he'd been waiting for the call, but when he spoke, his voice was quieter than I remembered. "Olivia," he said. "Are you okay?" I hesitated. How was I supposed to answer that? How was I supposed to say that I was better, when I still felt hollow? When I still missed the way things were before everything fell apart? But I wasn't going to lie anymore. "I'm getting there," I said, and it felt true. "I miss you," he said. It sounded genuine, but it also sounded like something he'd said out of habit. Something he thought he needed to say. "I know," I replied. "But it's not enough." There was a long pause. "I understand." For the first time, I felt like he did. He wasn't trying to fix it. He wasn't begging me to come back. He was just accepting it. Accepting that we were over. And that, more than anything, made me feel like I could finally breathe. I hung up the phone, and for a long time, I sat there, staring at the wall. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I wasn't anything except calm, as if the storm inside me had finally settled. It wasn't easy, letting go. But it was necessary. And that was enough. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone anymore. I didn't need Nathan's approval or his understanding. I was building something new, and maybe it wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And that was something I hadn't realized I needed until now. The road ahead was uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared of what came next. I was ready. For oh, Minnie.